Hello, welcome to Chapter 4, Part 2 of our notes. We ended our notes last time talking about relationships on the food web. We were talking about the flow of energy and which direction it's going, basically. Well, now let's talk about keystone species. That leads us right into these guys here. Keystone species, these generally are organisms that basically, they have a huge impact on their environment. Really big impact on their environment. Usually, you need to know this, usually the keystone species is usually the top predator. Usually. Generally speaking, it's the very top of the food chain. If you were to remove the top of the food chain, it would be like removing a keystone from a set of blocks, and the whole thing would come apart. Well, your book uses an example of sea otters. All right, sea otters in their environment, yeah, they're a keystone species. Here's what they do. Well, here's the food chain there. Kelp forests provide the production of food. They're the primary producers. Kelp gets eaten by sea urchins. All right, they're the primary consumers of the kelp, and sea otters eat sea urchins. All right, so what happened? Well, humans they thought it was cool to hunt these guys and remove them almost out, almost make them go extinct. What happened next? Oh well, the kelp communities got destroyed. There was a huge jump in sea urchins. So you remove the predator that controls the population below it, and now you get an explosion in the population below it. Sea urchin explosion population ended up in destruction of kelp forests, basically. So kelp forests are gone. Now all kinds of fish aren't around, and the entire habitat is just thrown off balance. So keystone species, usually the very top of the food chain, would do that, by the way. What happens, basically, we just discussed the removal of this predator, and we showed you what happens down the food chain. It's a cascade of events. So you remove sea otters, you get more sea urchins, here's more sea urchins, and you get kelp eaten to nothing. So it's a cascade of events. Everything has an effect on the next level below it. Okay, so in most cases we're talking top down. The keystone species gets hunted or removed. You remove a lion from a grassland. You remove a coyote from a chaparral community in our area, and things start to happen downhill, basically. All right, and that's the trophic cascade. Succession. Now, this is the order in which new species structure a community. What does that mean? All right, well, at some point you have a rock, you have a new island, okay? And that rock matter eventually, in a lot of cases, could become a forest of some sort. So you start from nothing, you start from rock, and you've got to work your way up to a certain situation. How does it work its way up? Well, we're going to explain the process first. We're going to talk about which species come in which order. The first ones are called the pioneer species, all right? Well, eventually that area, that habitat, it has certain climate, and the climate dictates where it's going to end up here. So you don't always end up as a forest. Like San Diego, we're not a forest community. We're not going to be a forest community because of our climate, how much weather, how much rain we have, all right? So, and it's dictated by your temperatures also. So what usually comes first? Well, what usually comes first after rock is exposed, you get these things called lichens and mosses. Okay, so we're going to go to the next page. We're going to talk about them some more. All right? So primary succession. All right, so you start with bare rock. Bare rock. Bare rock, not much can live on bare rock, right? You don't have soil. This is not soil. There's no soil present. All right, so bare rock, the first things that shows up are lichens. Well, they're mutualistic relationships. What does that mean? We learned before that they're happy relationships. Fungi and algae. Well, algae are green in this case, and they can produce food, all right? But they can't just attach themselves to rock very easily by themselves. Fungi, they can attach themselves to rock very easily, okay? The problem is they can't make their own food. They're not green. So what they do is they live together. They attach themselves to each other. They live together. The fungus gives the algae a way of attaching itself to the rock and connecting there, and then the algae produces food for both of them in this case. All right. What does the fungi do? What does this thing do? Well, lichens, they produce acidic materials. Why is that important? Well, they weather and break down rock. Weathering is the breaking down of rock, not erosion. Erosion is carrying it away. We're talking about breaking it down. So the weathering of rock breaks it down. Okay, and how does that happen? Well, the acids that were produced by the fungus and the lichens will weather the rock and begin the process of soil formation. So the path is this. You get lichens first, all right? Then you get moss, which are, they look a lot like lichens, but much more green. You've probably all stepped on them if you've gone outdoors and you saw, a lot of wet ground that was green. You saw moss probably. And from here, with all these acids that start getting secreted, soil starts to form. All right. Once soil forms, then you get into grasses, different kinds of grasses. And then from grasses, you get a little bigger, shrubs. And then from shrubs, you get into the trees, the different kinds of forests possible that can form. Eventually, you can only go so far and you reach a climax, and that's called your climax community. So let's talk about primary versus secondary succession. Primary is when you start from scratch, rock. Secondary is when soil's intact. All right. So after a fire, you'll see, an area looks black, charcoal everywhere, carbon everywhere, trees gone, not much green. And then, after a rain season or so, then you'll see a lot of green start coming up. Well, that would be secondary succession because soil was intact. This happens after farming because a lot of times soil's intact. I just said a fire, a storm, a landslide. Okay. So things get destroyed in these things. And if soil's present, you have secondary succession. All right. Invasive species. What do these guys do? Well, they enter an area. They're introduced. Limiting factors aren't a problem there. Well, they don't have limiting factors. Their population is unregulated for the most part. They may not have a predator in that community. They may not have a competitor in that community. So all of a sudden, with this lack of competition, they just outcompete all the organisms in the area. And your chapter began with zebra mussels and what they did, basically. So be aware of what they did. There could be a question about zebra mussels on your test. Well, this is going to talk about zebra mussels in general, so we're going to talk about how they became invasive. Well, what happened? Ships in one part of the world take in water, it's called ballast water, and they load it to maintain balance as they cruise the seas. So their tanks get full, they go on their voyage, they use this as a means of balancing the ship, and then they get to their location, wherever it happens to be, and then they discharge their water. So this usually happens in far-off places. So that's how the mussels came here, basically. And this happens with all kinds of sea creatures. They got picked up in one hemisphere and end up in another hemisphere. And they become invasive a lot of the time. And it becomes a problem. All right, so now we're going to talk about Earth's biomes. These are huge areas, big geographic areas. And they're pretty much controlled by their climate, right? Their climate dictates what can grow there. So they're geographic areas with a certain vegetation, all right? And that climate dictates the vegetation, and so they're going to have certain kinds of weather patterns. Normally, we're going to talk about this, and you'll notice here, this has to do with precipitation and temperature, and it shows you, based on how wet the area is, what kind of vegetation you're going to be able to get. If you don't have a lot of rain, you're not going to have a rainforest, basically. It's impossible. All right. And these show you what kind of environment you can have based on how cold it gets. All right. So it shows you, this is a forecast of the biomes. The tundra's colder. Yep. And not a lot of precipitation. The Boreal Forest, colder. All right. Still on the lower end of precipitation. Not a lot. All right. But you'll notice there's snow. It just stays there because it's frozen. And then you go in the next level, all right, we're starting getting warmer, all right, but we're getting in a range where we're getting some precipitation. Here's San Diego. We're not the hottest, but we're definitely on the warmer side, all right, and our precipitation is on the lower side also, so this is where we sit, right here. We're chaparral biome. Savannas, grasslands, tropical dry forest, still a lot of rain, but it's considered a dry forest, and then tropical rainforest. And then we have some temperate forests, and temperate deciduous. So you'll notice all the forests, for the most part, they require a lot of rain. This is very important. You need to know what's going on a map. This is a big part of AP Environmental Science. And what you do need to understand, I know a lot of you are lacking this in your education, what you do need to understand that 0 degrees, that's latitude, that's the equator. So it's right down the center. Excuse me. 0 degrees right there. When you go north or south of 0 degrees, you're going north latitude or south latitude. So this is The Tropic of Cancer is 23.5 degrees north. The Tropic of Capricorn, 23.5 degrees south. San Diego, we're over here. We're about 32 or so degrees north. And because of where we live, it creates really nice weather, all right? And it has to do with wind patterns and other things. We'll talk about that in another chapter. But ideally, if you're really close to the equator, you're going to get warmer. It's going to get warmer. If you're really far from the equator, you're going to get colder. Just a fact of the matter. You can be north or south, all right? So here's Antarctica down here. It's cold. So the farther away from the equator, north or south you go, it gets colder. So the farther away from the equator you go, you have less biodiversity. The most biodiversity is in the equator. The farther away from that you go, you start reducing biodiversity. And that's because temperature, you start having less productivity, less base of your food chain, and then you're going to have less organisms. Here's another reason why climate varies. So elevation. So these are huge factors. Latitude, north or south, will dictate temperatures and rainfall. Okay, San Diego is ideal at 32, and we'll talk about it later. It's ideal. We have really beautiful weather because of how far. We're not too far from the equator, basically, and we're at the right latitude where we get what's called a common high pressure system, and this has to do with atmospheric pressure. All right, so we get a really nice pressure system that builds up right around 30 degrees north and 30 degrees south, which creates really nice weather for us year round. And the fact that we're near a coastline also has a big factor in all that. So San Diego is kind of an ideal place because of many things. So temperature is really controlled by latitude, how far north and south, how far above sea level, because that changes a lot of things with climate. All right, the rain shadow effect. So here's the deal. You need to know that the windward is the side that the wind is approaching, and the leeward side is the side that the wind is basically passing through. All right, so the windward would be the approaching wind. All right, here's a common thing you need to know. It's called the rain shadow effect. So when this wind pattern hits this mountainside or this hill, all right, and this is coming off the ocean, so it's moist air, it starts to rise, and as it rises, it gets colder and colder and colder. And when it gets too cold, it condenses. All right, so what does that mean? A lot of rain, a lot of precipitation on the windward side of a mountain. Common. This is very common. So wherever you have areas that have mountains right next to a coastline, that warm water hits it, it rises, it condenses, and they get a lot of rainfall. It's a wet area. Kind of like the Pacific Northwest here in the United States. All right, hits it, you get a lot of rainfall. Well, because of all that moisture that fell as precipitation, on the other side of this mountain, you have really dry conditions. And so much so that you can get to the bottom of that mountain and then start moving. And you probably will have a desert over here because you're just not getting, and it depends on your latitude on whether you're going to have a desert. So you could have a desert here if you're at around 30 degrees latitude. All right. So what is the rain shadow effect? Well, this side here has a rain shadow. There is no rain over here. Okay. Over here, we have rain. Windward side rain, leeward side no rain. There's a rain shadow, a warm, dry area. So if a city was built here, warm, dry conditions. If a city was built somewhere in here, they're going to have a lot of moisture, a lot of rain. It's going to be wet. Okay, so it's called the rain shadow. The biomes, the temperate deciduous forest. Here's the first one, all right? Now, I'm warning you all. You're going to need to know about these things. These are called climatographs. And climatographs tell you two major things about a biome. They tell you the average monthly temperature, and that'll be in one data. And it could be, one of them could be in the form of a bar graph to differentiate from the two, all right? So you're going to get the mean average temperature, and that's this data over here, all right? And then over here, you're going to get the mean monthly precipitation, so how much moisture you expect. So if you notice, their moisture is, and it's in millimeters. Beware of that. All right, I can give you centimeters. It could look different. All right, so this is millimeters. So this is 8 centimeters or 80 millimeters right here. So it just shows you about how much rain they expect all year. Their rain season, this place gets a lot of rain. It's a forest. Forests require rain. This is on the higher end of rain, and you'll notice that temperature, it doesn't get below zero. All right, and it peaks right around, I don't know, 25-ish C, which isn't very warm. So they don't get too warm, all right? And they don't get too cold. They stay above zero around, right? It is still freezing, right? Real close to freezing, but it's not below zero. All right. So here's their temperature range. Here's their moisture range. These are the kinds of trees that lose their leaves in the winter. And why do they do it? They do it so that they can preserve their water and they don't dry out. These forests, a lot of forests don't have fertile soils. I'm telling you, you need to understand that. The more rain a forest generally has, a lot of times you had a lot of soil erosion and a lot of mineral leaching, so they won't have fertile soil. So this temperate deciduous forest has fertile soils, great soil. All right, and you got to be aware of all this stuff. You got to be aware of the climatograph when you do this, and generally mid latitudes. And I'm going to go back, and you have to be able to find generalities of where they could be on the map. All right, so temperate deciduous forest, look, eastern United States is where you'll commonly find it, eastern United States. All right, temperate grasslands. Well, this is the central part of the United States also. This is where we have farm country. A lot of these have fertile soil. A lot of it is converted into agriculture. Not a crazy amount of precipitation. All right, so look, their mean temperature, it gets cold, below zero here. Kind of comes back up to around similar to the last one, and comes back down a little bit below zero. And look at their precipitation, right around 30 millimeters. It's not excessive. It's not like if they had more precipitation, they'd be a forest. They're not a forest because they don't get that much precipitation. Temperate rainforests. So this is the Pacific Northwest, where it's not a tropical rainforest. It is a temperate rainforest. It looks a lot like a traditional rainforest. You get a lot of rain, okay? But it's rich in rainfall, but it's not, in this case, it's not at the equator. It's at a mid-latitude area. And it's still a rainforest, but it's a mid-latitude rainforest. A lot of coniferous, cone-bearing trees. Soil is fertile, okay? A tropical rainforest, it is not. It is fertile in this one, all right? So where in the U.S.? The coastal Pacific Northwest region, all right? Banana slugs are what you're going to find there, a lot of them. By the way, take a look at this. Precipitation. It's a rainforest. It's at the top. A lot of rain. Temperatures don't go below zero. Peak in the summer. Here's a tropical rainforest. Now, these guys, very poor acidic soils. All right. A lot of erosion, a lot of leaching. Okay. Generally, they have a canopy, very dark on the inside. The most diverse land or terrestrial biome, meaning the diversity of life there has the most biodiversity. Terrestrial, what are you going to find there? A lot of insects in a lot of cases. Okay. A lot of plant species that you won't find anywhere else. Central America, South America, you need to know where the equator is. I'm going to back of the map. Okay, look where the equator is. Anything in this equatorial region here is going to be rainforest-like. All right, so look, the green, the rainforest, the green, the green. This is a tropical rainforest region. Okay, you need to know where the equator is. It's not up here in Central America. It's not up here. It is down here. The equator runs through South America and Africa and through this region right here. Right? This region here is called Oceana. Tropical rainforest. Look at the rain. Off the chart. Look at the temperature. Excuse me. That was a temperate rainforest, tropical rainforest. Here we go. Once again, rain. Look at that. Off the chart the entire year. Go back and compare it to the previous one. It fluctuates. Okay, so they have their drier seasons in a temperate rainforest. Tropical rainforest, there is no dry season. It's just wet. Look at their temperature, warm all the time. Tropical dry forest. I've been to one of these in Australia before. This is exactly what they look like, basically. Pretty dry, very dry. A lot of the areas there have been converted to agriculture, very erosion prone, because anywhere you have dry areas, you're going to have a lot of erosion. Okay, different types of trees, deciduous forests in some seasons. Look at this situation. It's warm. Okay, temperature's warm. But look at the mean monthly precipitation. You know, it's very little, almost none, and then it jumps, has a rain season, and it comes back down. Okay, tropical dry forest. Savannas, these grasslands. Temperatures, okay, mean monthly temperature stays fairly consistent all year. This is where people want to go to Africa and go on a safari. Same thing. It's low, it comes peak, they have their rain season, and then they come back where it's very dry. So it's dry with the rain season. Deserts. Look at the precipitation. Okay, these are the least primary productive biomes. All right, these basically, look at this. You don't have a lot of photosynthesis taking place. You need to know where the Middle East is on a map. So let's go back. So look at the desert regions, yellow. Look at this. This is a huge desert, Sahara, all over. This is the Middle East area. All right, you need to see where there's deserts here. You also have them down here in Australia. Australia has some dry parts. We have them over here in California, near us in California and Mexico. All right, but especially you need to know where they're at. You notice the desert? Look at the temperature. It's pretty warm. It doesn't even get that cold, and it can get cold at night. We do know that, but this is an average monthly temperature, and then it gets, peaks out and comes back down. But there's hardly any precipitation all year. Not much photosynthesis at all. Lowest productivity of them all. Tundras. These are actually like frozen deserts. They have low productivity also. They're the second lowest to the desert. Look at their situation here. Their monthly precipitation, it just stays pretty low. They have a little bit of a rain season, you can say. Okay. And their temperature, look at this, -20s down here. It's cold, it's cold, it's cold. It peaks out just about 5-ish and comes back down. Their ground stays frozen almost all year round. What's their vegetation? Lichens. They have more vegetation. This is their short summer. It looks pretty. Everyone thinks of a tundra and thinks of it frozen all year. Yeah, they're frozen all year. The ground's frozen, but this is what it looks like for their growing season. So they have more productivity than a desert. They definitely do, but not that much in general. They're the second lowest. The Boreal Forest. This is the forest closest to us, where people like to go snowboarding and things of that nature. You're going to find wolves, bears, birds, moose. We may not have them in our forests here because of what we've done. We've pushed a lot of the wildlife away, but pine-bearing trees, which are conifers basically, or evergreens they may call them. Sometimes they call it the taiga. Let's look at it. It gets cold. It gets cold. It gets really cold, and this is where we go snowboarding, and then they come back up to, I don't know, about 13 or so C average. Come back up, so it doesn't get too hot, all right? And then their moisture levels right here, look at it. They have a peak, and then they come back down. All right. This is San Diego's biome. This is us. Look at our temperature, relatively the same all year long. This is San Diego, and this is our 70-ish degree, 65 to 75 degree year-round San Diego weather right here. We have definitely our drier seasons. Okay, so precipitation, we have our drier seasons, and then we definitely have our rain seasons. Our rain seasons are usually April, May for us. It's strange how it says here that we don't have it here, but those are usually the rain season. But for us, it might fall earlier, like earlier in the spring, like March-ish. But generally speaking, April usually is where we get it. All right, but remember, this is chaparrals in general, not just San Diego in particular. All right, what's up with that? Well, fires are normal for our communities. There's fires all the time. Helps the seeds to germinate. It's actually an advantage. It's an adaptation for these particular seeds. What do we have? Mild, wet winters. Now they don't get that. They're not that wet, really. Warm, dry summers, almost desert-like. Okay. What's our plant life like? Well, chaparral are shrubs, and this is what our hillsides look like right here. Be aware of what a climatograph would look like for that. And where do you find chaparral communities? You're going to generally find them at 30 degrees north and 30 degrees south latitude near a coastline. All right, that's the end.